I'm now going to hand over to Erica Odell, who will be talking about our chemical use associated with vegetation management and thinking about potentially alternative chemicals or alternative practices that are safer for people and the environment. So all about continuous improvement in that area. So over to you, Erica.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. There we go. How's that for everyone?
That looks great.
Excellent. Okay, so today I wanted to share some of the research we're completing to reduce impacts from chemical use and management activities as part of the Aquatic Pollution Prevention Partnership. This research is aligned with several of the Healthy Waterways Strategy's priorities, but principally how pest and unwanted species, including their management, affect waterways. For many management authorities, vegetation management is the largest preventative maintenance expense and one of the most significant consumers of chemicals, specifically herbicides, as they are the most effective, predictable, and economic solution to control unwanted vegetation. However, herbicides are not suitable for use in all areas, and some could have ecological and human health impacts. Melbourne Water's vegetation management program plays a key role in the health of waterways around Melbourne and is essential for the safe delivery of services such as water, the prevention of adverse impacts, and the protection of water quality. Between 2013 and 2018, Melbourne Water managed over 8,500 kilometres of waterway vegetation. The Healthy Waterway Strategy is committed to minimising environmental impact. Vegetation management therefore provides a great opportunity for Melbourne Water to protect waterways and to reduce contamination through the reduction of herbicide use and the adoption of non-chemical vegetation management practices. In order for an alternative management approach to be viable, they need to be effective at managing the vegetation, be cost efficient, be safe for the operator to use, and also for the community and the environment, and be accepted by the community. So to determine the viability of alternative vegetation management practices, we devised a series of 4 studies to address these obstacles to the adoption and implementation of alternatives. We assessed 3 non-chemical vegetation management practices, which were brush cutting, edge mowing, and heat weed, which is effectively pouring boiling water on vegetation, and compared them to glyphosate spraying, which was the current vegetation management practice used across our study sites. To assess the effectiveness of alternatives, we trialled the 4 different methods along grass fence lines at 9 different sites across Melbourne and looked at their effectiveness in controlling grass and broadleaf vegetation over 60 and 90 days. So these are some results from that first study. These are representative photos from our treatment sites. Time is along the bottom and the methods trialled are along the side. The graphs on the right-hand side show the responses of the different vegetation types to the different methods we used. As you can see, brush cutting and edge mowing were great at immediately neatening the sites. However, the vegetation is merely cut back and not killed, so ground cover remains the same and vegetation at the site recovers rapidly. So by day 60, it needs to be treated again. In contrast, both heatweed and glyphosate suppressed vegetation below baseline levels for over 60 days, but the dead vegetation remains and it can make the site look a little unsightly. Heatweed or boiling water had a strong initial knockdown, but there was some minor recovery of grass that had occurred by day 60. Broadleaf plants, however, were particularly young and small plants were less resilient and responded quite well to hot water treatment. Glyphosate took about 2 weeks to achieve knockdown, but there was very little regrowth apparent at day 60, so it was highly effective. In autumn, we repeated the effectiveness study, but focused on glyphosate and heatweed only. Again, we saw that glyphosate was highly effective and suppressed vegetation beyond the 90-day period, but there was some resilience exhibited in broadleaf weeds. In contrast, vegetation treated with heatweed recovered much faster in autumn than what it did in summer in the previous round. This may be because of the higher soil moisture content in autumn. Water has a high thermal capacity, which means a lot of the heat that we are applying is being lost to the surrounding ground instead of being transferred directly to the plant, making the mechanism of death less effective. So after the effectiveness, we wanted to review the cost of various treatments. To determine the cost of each treatment method, 8 sites were treated with brush cutting and 4 sites were treated with heatweed. Data was then gathered from prior work orders to determine how much each site had historically cost to be treated with glyphosate. Unfortunately, we were unable to determine the cost of edge mowing as we couldn't obtain the necessary machinery for the experiment. The figures presented in this slide here for brush cutting and heatweed are relative to the cost and the time required to complete vegetation management with glyphosate as it was our baseline. On a per treatment basis, brush cutting was determined to be comparable in cost to glyphosate, with sites being able to be treated for less than 1.5 times the cost and required approximately the same amount of time. In contrast, heatweed was more expensive and cost 4 times the amount of glyphosate, but may marginally reduce the amount of time required to complete vegetation management. However, this is on a per treatment basis, and each method has a differing degree of effectiveness, as we saw in the first study. So from that study, we estimated that brush cutting would need to be completed on a monthly basis, whereas heatweed may not be required as often. However, with heatweed, it is recommended to initially treat sites intensively, approximately 6 to 9 treatments per year. But as boiling water can kill seeds and destroy root tissue, the recovery of vegetation over time will be slowed, so the number of treatments required per year will drop to 3 or 4. Glyphosate is currently sprayed approximately 3 times per year at our sites, so this is the frequency that we went with. When treatment frequency is considered, on an annual basis, brush cutting would increase the cost of vegetation management by approximately 6 times and increase the time to complete activities by 5 times. In contrast, heatweed would initially increase costs by up to a maximum of 12 times, assuming that 9 treatments per year are needed. But over a period of time, this would reduce to just 5 times the cost. And in the long term, it may reduce the time required to complete vegetation management activities. Our third question was, how would the change in management practices affect the injury risk of operators? We looked at both handheld and ride-on machinery. A software called ErgoAnalyst was used to determine the potential injury risk to the musculoskeletal system of operators. The assessment assumed individuals completed activities for the same amount of time each. All tasks, except for the handheld brush cutter, had equal or lower risk of injury to operators. The handheld brush cutter, however, was found to potentially increase the risk to operators' arms. So this would need to be considered when developing a program that may integrate alternatives into the program. There are also many other health and safety factors to consider, such as projectile risks from rotating blades, burns, and chemical exposure, to name a few. But this stage of the assessment focused squarely on risks to musculoskeletal systems. Finally, we wanted to find out how the community felt about vegetation management. So to determine customer perceptions, a survey of residents around the trial sites of the effectiveness study was completed. They were asked whether they preferred the traditional approach to management or whether they wanted to see a more environmentally conscious alternative approach, even if it meant that the site may look a little messier. Overall, attitudes towards vegetation management were evenly split, and there was no difference in perception based on gender or region. However, respondents over the age of 55 did demonstrate a preference for a more environmentally friendly approach. So Herbicides such as glyphosate have been the dominant part of vegetation management for many government agencies, and this is because they provide long-lasting control and are cost-effective. But various alternatives can be viable depending on the context of management. Brush cutting and edge mowing both saw great initial knockdown and leave sites neat. However, their effectiveness is not long-lasting, and sites can return to their original condition in under 30 days. On a per treatment basis, brush cutting is relatively inexpensive, but brush cutting may also increase the risk of injury to operators. So somewhere that brush cutting could be used would be in areas not trafficked very frequently by community members, for example. We also saw that heatweed suppresses vegetation for longer than what cutting does, with applications in summer providing comparable control to glyphosate in summer. However, autumn applications showed reduced effectiveness, and on a program-wide scale, adopting heatweed may increase costs considerably. Heat weeding, for example, could be quite useful in sites where herbicides can't be used or where they are restricted, such as around playgrounds in some areas. Overall, there is no one size fits all when it comes to finding a suitable alternative to herbicides. Adoption of alternative approaches will depend on the context of management, and research is helping to make evidence-based changes to vegetation management programs. An integrated management approach is needed for large-scale programs. A combination of methods should be used to successfully control vegetation while maintaining economic sustainability and moderating the impact to the operator and the environment. As in some areas, herbicides will still be needed. We are investigating lower risk alternative herbicides, and we have established trials to investigate the effectiveness and the off-target effects of various herbicides. Outcomes from the greater project will be used to guide management planning and to protect our waterways and minimize impacts from herbicide contamination. Thank you for listening. There are a lot of people involved in this project, in the coordination and conducting the trials, and Jackie Myers is the lead investigator on this project.
Great, thanks very much, Erica. Appreciate that, and important research for us, thinking about our chemical use and our approaches to vegetation management, but importantly, any changes that we think are needed are based on good information, good data to support those changes. So thank you for that.